Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive.
Yeah.
Today, we're going to be looking at the AAA framework,
Okay.
that is authentication, authorization, and accounting.
Right.
Now, this is something that most of our listeners are very familiar with,
They
at
are.
least in practice, if not necessarily by these specific terms.
Hmm.
So we encounter this every day when we log into our devices.
Yeah. When we're connecting to servers,
When we're accessing pretty much anything online these days.
pretty much.
And so today we're going to kind of break down exactly what this is, how it works.
Right.
And why it's so important in this day and age.
Exactly.
So I think a good place to start would be to just kind of paint a picture of what exactly we're talking about here.
Yeah.
So authentication, authorization, and accounting.
Those words.
Big words. Yeah, intimidating to some people.
Uh-huh.
But, let's try to break it down into some,
Relatable terms.
relatable terms. Yeah.
Yeah.
So think about when you log into your email, for example. You put in your username, you put in your password.
You might get a code sent to your phone.
Exactly right. So that's authentication in action.
Yeah.
It's basically verifying who you are.
It is. It's not enough to just say, I am so-and-so.
Right.
You have to prove it.
Right.
And that proof is usually in the form of these credentials, the username and the password, that match up with something that the system already knows.
Exactly.
And that's why it's so important to have strong, unique passwords for every single account you have.
Absolutely.
Because if one system gets compromised and they have your password and you've reused that password elsewhere,
Oh, yeah.
then they can get into your other accounts.
Yeah, it's like that old saying, a chain is only as strong as its weakest link.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So your entire digital life is only as strong as your weakest password.
Absolutely.
So make sure that your passwords are strong and unique and ideally stored in a password manager.
Yeah, I think that's a great tip right there.
Thank you.
So we've talked about authentication. We've proven who we are. We've gotten into the system.
Yep. We're
We're in the front door.
We're past the bouncer.
Now what? What's to stop us from just poking around
Well-
in areas we shouldn't be?
Well, that's where authorization comes in.
Okay.
So you've proven who you are. You're in the system, but that doesn't mean you have access to everything.
Gotcha.
Authorization is the set of rules that determine what you're allowed to do once you're authenticated.
Okay.
So let's go back to that company example. If you work in the shipping department,
Right.
Authorization is going to make sure that you can only access shipping-related systems and data.
Makes sense.
You're not going to be able to see financial records or anything like that.
You're not going to be able to access the CEO's email.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's all about keeping things compartmentalized
Yeah.
and making sure that people only have access to the information that they need to do their jobs.
So it's kind of like having different levels of clearance within a company.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. So you've got your interns, they can see some stuff.
Right.
Then you've got your regular employees, they have a little bit more access.
Right.
Your managers have even more. And then your executives have access to everything.
Right. And so this is kind of like the digital equivalent of that.
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay, cool. So we've got authentication, we've got authorization.
Right.
What about this last one, accounting?
Yes, accounting. This
Yeah.
sounds a little bit, well, like,
Yeah,
accounting.
it's boring spreadsheets.
Exactly.
Right.
But it's actually really important for security.
Okay.
So accounting is all about keeping detailed records of everything that happens.
Like what kind of things?
So like when people log in, what files, they access any data transfers that occur when they log out,
Yeah.
the whole shebang.
Okay.
So it's not just for, bean counting.
Yeah.
It's crucial for security because it creates an audit trail.
Okay.
So if there's ever a problem, like let's say there's a data breach or someone's suspected of doing something they shouldn't be doing, investigators can go back and look at these logs and retrace the steps and see who did what and when.
So it's kind of like a security camera for the digital world.
Exactly.
Okay.
Because you can see who came in, who went out, what they did while they were there.
Gotcha.
It's all about accountability.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So we've kind of laid the groundwork here.
Yeah, we've got the basics.
Got the basics.
The 3 A's.
Let's look at how this actually works in a real world situation.
Sure.
Okay, so imagine you're working from home.
Okay.
You're trying to connect to your company's network.
Right.
And you're using a VPN
Of course.
to do so.
Securely.
Right? So what's actually happening behind the scenes when you do that?
Right. So you open up your VPN software, you put in your username, you put in your password,
Right.
you hit connect, and that sends a request out to the VPN concentrator.
VPN concentrator.
Yeah, it's basically like a gatekeeper.
Okay.
It sits at the edge of the network,
All right.
and it decides who gets in and who doesn't.
Yeah.
Now, this concentrator doesn't store all the user data itself.
Okay.
It needs to check with a central authority,
Yeah.
and that's where the AAA server comes in.
Okay, so the VPN concentrator is basically saying, hey, AAA server, this person wants in. Are they legit?
Exactly.
Okay.
And the AAA server checks its records. If everything matches up, it gives the green light to the VPN concentrator.
And then you're allowed in?
And then you're in.
Okay.
So this centralized system, this AAA server, can handle potentially thousands of systems, all relying on that one server to validate credentials.
Wow. So that's incredibly efficient.
It is. It's much more efficient than having every single system store its own user database.
Right, yeah.
And it also makes it easier to manage security because you only have to update one system if there's a change in policy or something like that.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But it raises another question.
Good.
How do you verify the device itself, not just the user?
That's a good question.
Right, like what if somebody finds a company laptop?
Right.
How do you stop them from just logging in?
Well, we use digital certificates.
Okay.
These are like digital passports for devices.
Okay.
So each certificate contains information about the device, and it's signed by a certificate authority, or CA.
A CA.
Yeah, think of it like a government issuing a passport.
Okay.
It adds a layer of trust.
Gotcha.
So when a device tries to connect, it presents its passport, this digital certificate.
Right.
And the system checks the CO's signature to make sure it's authentic.
Like looking at the watermark.
Exactly.
Not a passcode.
Exactly.
Okay.
And if the signature checks out, the device is allowed in.
Cool. So we've verified the user, we've verified the device. What about controlling what they can actually do on the network?
Right. So that comes down to authorization models.
Okay.
These define the rules of the road. They determine what users can access and what they can't.
So it's not just about letting them in the front door.
Right.
It's also about making sure they don't wander into the wrong rooms.
Exactly.
Okay.
So there are different types of authorization models, but their purpose is all the same, to make sure that even once you're in, you can only access what you're supposed to.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. But I imagine it can get pretty complicated when you're dealing with lots of users and tons of different resources.
Oh, absolutely.
Like think about a busy shipping department
Right.
with, dozens of employees, all needing access to various systems and data.
Yeah.
How do you manage all of that without it becoming a complete nightmare?
Right. So you're absolutely right. Assigning permissions to each individual user would be a logistical nightmare, especially as companies grow.
Oh, yeah.
So that's where the concept of abstraction through roles and groups comes in.
Okay.
It's much more efficient to group users with similar needs and assign permissions to the group as a whole.
Okay, so instead of giving John and Jane from shipping individual permissions, you would create a shipping department group.
Exactly.
Okay.
And give that group access to the relevant resources.
Gotcha. So anyone added to that group automatically gets the permissions that they need.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's more efficient, it's easier to manage, and it reduces the risk of mistakes.
Okay, and so this kind of mirrors how we organize teams in the real world anyway.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. So
yeah,
we've talked about the building blocks of AAA.
Yeah.
How it works in practice.
Right.
And why it's so important. And I think this is a good place to kind of pause for now.
Okay.
But we'll be back in the next part to dive even deeper into this topic.
Sounds good.
So stay tuned.
See you then.
Okay, so we've got this idea of grouping people together.
Right, roles and groups.
Based on their roles, yeah, to streamline things.
Exactly.
But you mentioned earlier that there are actually different authorization models.
Right.
So what are some of the most common ones? How do they differ?
So one that you've probably heard of is role-based access control, or RBAC.
RBAC?
Yeah. And it's exactly what we've been talking about, using roles to define permissions. But then you've also got attribute-based access control, or ABAC.
Okay, ABAC. So how's that different?
So ABAC gets a lot more granular.
Yeah.
It uses attributes like your location, the type of device you're using,
Oh, wow.
even the time of day to decide what you can access.
Oh, so it's kind of context aware?
Exactly.
Okay.
So you could say something like, only allow access to this super sensitive financial data if they're on a company device inside the corporate network, and it's between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m.
Oh, wow. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
So it's like a security system that adapts to the situation.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. And then what else is there?
So then there's policy-based access control, or PBAC.
PBAC. Okay.
Yeah, and this one uses specific policies, almost like rules, to determine access.
Okay.
And these policies can get quite complex,
I bet.
combining various conditions and attributes.
So like a decision tree almost.
Kind of, yeah.
Okay.
So it's really about defining very specific rules for who can access what.
Okay. That makes sense. So it sounds like choosing the right model
Yeah.
really depends on the organization and what
Mhm.
they're trying to protect.
Absolutely.
Are some models better suited for certain situations?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
The size of the organization, the sensitivity, the data,
Right.
even the industry they're in,
Yeah.
all of those factors can influence which model is the best fit.
So there's no one size fits all.
Nope.
Oh,
It's really about finding the right tool for the job.
okay, that makes sense. So we've got this framework, AAA,
Right.
that verifies who we are,
Uh-huh.
controls what we can access,
Yep.
keeps track of everything we do.
The trifecta.
It's like a multi-layered security system for the digital world.
Exactly.
But with technology constantly changing, how is this framework evolving to meet new challenges?
That's a great question.
Hmm.
So one of the biggest trends right now is this move towards zero trust security.
Zero trust. I've heard that term thrown around.
Yeah, it's a big one. So traditional security models kind of assumed that anyone inside the network could be trusted.
Right. Kind of like once you're past the gate.
Exactly.
Hmm.
But zero trust flips that on its head. It's like saying, trust no one, verify everyone and everything all the time.
Oh, wow. So even if I'm already logged into the network,
Yeah,
I still need to constantly prove I'm allowed to access each specific resource.
that's the idea.
Okay, so it's not just about getting through the front door.
Right.
It's about proving you belong in every single room you enter.
Exactly.
Okay, that sounds intense.
It's definitely a more rigorous approach to security.
So how does that actually work in practice?
So zero trust usually involves things like multi-factor authentication,
Right.
microsegmentation, which is basically dividing the network into smaller, more isolated segments,
Okay.
and real-time threat detection.
So it's like having a security guard at every door.
Kind of. Yeah, it's about minimizing the potential damage if a breach does occur.
But it's much more proactive.
Exactly.
Instead of just assuming everything's fine. Once someone's inside the network.
Exactly. You can't assume anything. You have to verify everything.
Okay, so zero trust. That's a big one.
Yeah,
Are there any other major changes on the horizon for AAA?
definitely. So artificial intelligence and machine learning are playing a larger and larger role in cybersecurity these days.
AI and cybersecurity.
Yeah, so imagine a system that can sift through mountains of data and spot patterns and anomalies that humans might miss.
Oh, wow. So it's like having a super-powered security guard.
Kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like having a tireless, vigilant watchdog constantly monitoring the network for any signs of trouble.
Okay, that sounds pretty impressive.
It is, and it's becoming more and more important as cyber attacks become more sophisticated.
Right, because the bad guys are using AI too.
Exactly. It's an arms race.
So we need to be using AI to defend ourselves.
Absolutely.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And AI can also help automate a lot of these security tasks, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it can free up human analysts to focus on the really complex issues.
So it's not about replacing humans. It's about augmenting them.
Yeah.
Exactly. Giving them the tools they need to be more effective.
Okay, that makes sense. And then, of course, we have the rise of cloud computing,
Yes, the cloud.
which is changing everything.
It is.
How does AAA fit into this cloud-based world?
That's a really interesting question. So cloud computing presents a unique challenge for AAA.
Okay.
On the one hand, cloud providers often offer really robust security features
Right.
that can actually enhance AAA.
Okay.
But on the other hand, organizations need to figure out how to extend their existing AAA policies and controls
Right.
to this cloud environment, which can be tricky.
Okay, so it's like we're moving our security system
Yeah.
to a whole new house,
Exactly.
and we need to make sure everything still works.
And that all the doors and windows are still locked.
Exactly right.
Yeah, it's a challenge, but it's one that we have to overcome.
Okay, so it sounds like AAA is adapting and evolving to keep up with these changes.
It is. It has to, or it wouldn't be very effective.
Right.
Cybersecurity is a constantly evolving field.
Yeah. And AAA is right there on the front lines.
It really is fascinating stuff, right? I mean, it's a lot to wrap your head around, all this tech talk, but
Right.
at the end of the day, what does it actually mean for the average listener?
Right.
What can they take away from all of this?
Yeah, so I think the first step is just awareness,
Yeah.
understanding that AAA is working in the background of your digital life
Yeah.
every single day,
Right.
and knowing that you play a role in it too.
Okay.
So strong, unique passwords for every account,
Right.
enabling multi-factor authentication wherever possible.
Right.
These are simple but powerful steps that you can take to protect yourself.
It's like locking your front door, even if it's just a quick trip to the store.
Exactly.
It's a small effort,
Right.
but it can make a big difference.
Absolutely.
Okay, so beyond passwords, what else can people do?
So be cautious online.
Yeah.
Think before you click on links, especially from unknown sources.
Right.
Don't download attachments unless you're sure they're safe. And stay informed about the latest cybersecurity threats. Knowledge is your best defense.
So it's about being proactive and not just assuming that everything's secure.
Exactly.
We need to take responsibility for our own cybersecurity.
Absolutely.
Okay. I wanted to circle back to something we talked about earlier.
Okay.
These roles and groups in authorization.
Right.
Why is this approach so important, especially for larger organizations?
Yeah, so imagine trying to manage access for thousands of individual users,
Right.
each with different needs.
Oh, yeah.
It would be an absolute nightmare.
Right.
So roles and groups allow us to streamline that process.
Mm.
So instead of assigning permissions to each person individually, we group them based on their jobs and assign permissions to the group as a whole.
So it's not about giving Bob and accounting access to marketing data.
Right.
It's about giving the entire accounting team access to the financial systems they need.
Exactly.
Right. Okay, it's more organized, it's more efficient. And it's not just about efficiency, it's about security too, right?
Oh, absolutely.
By centralizing that authorization management,
Right.
we reduce the risk of human error, and we make sure that those permissions are applied consistently
Exactly.
across the board.
Yeah, it's all about consistency and reducing the attack surface.
Okay, so it's like having a set of master keys
Right.
for each department instead
Yeah.
of giving everyone individual keys
Exactly.
to every single room.
Exactly.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
Okay, cool. Well, we've covered a lot of ground today.
we have.
I mean, from authentication and authorization to accounting.
Right.
We talked about the future of AAA, with things like zero trust and AI.
Yeah, it's a constantly evolving field.
It is. So what are the key takeaways you want listeners to remember from this deep dive?
So I think the biggest takeaway is that AAA isn't just some obscure tech concept.
Right.
It's the foundation of cybersecurity.
Right.
It's protecting our digital lives every single day.
Okay.
From logging into our email to accessing our bank accounts, AAA is there, working behind the scenes.
Okay.
And it's not static. It's constantly evolving
Right.
to meet new challenges and threats.
Right. It's a cat and mouse game.
It is.
Right.
And we have to stay informed and adapt along with it.
Okay, so what can our listeners do to kind of stay ahead of the curve?
So I think the biggest thing is just to be aware.
Okay.
Understand how AAA works.
Yeah.
Understand the threats that are out there
Mm-hmm.
and take steps to protect yourself.
Okay.
Strong passwords, multi-factor authentication,
Yep.
being cautious online.
Right.
These are all simple things that can make a big difference.
Absolutely.
And stay informed.
Right.
Read articles, listen to podcasts like this one.
There you go.
Keep learning and keep adapting.
Well said. Well said. On that note, thank you all for joining us on this deep dive into the world of AAA.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
We hope you found it insightful. We hope you learned something.
I hope so.
Stay curious, stay informed, and stay safe out there.